Hello all, this is Chris. This is your lecture for week 5, February 11th. First up, there's a vacation coming up. The assignments for week 5 are not due until February 24th, which is great for all of us because one of your assignments is to read a classic novel. And we'll be talking about that in just a little while. And also to take a look at something you may not be familiar with, or you may, and those are called the Common Core State Standards. Before we get into the assignments, here's a bit of a review. Some people are coming into the class a little bit late and expect to be given a grade or points for their late assignment. If you have extenuating circumstances and you have evidence for that and you have contacted me and I've given you permission to do so, you may go ahead and do the assignment and expect the points if you're late. If not, I probably am not going to read what you post and you're not going to be getting any points. So that's the downside of this lecture. Let's talk about some things that are a little more positive. Let's talk a little bit about picture books. Many of you in this class are going on to become teachers to teach. And as I said before, picture books can be used at all levels and at all grade levels of a balanced literacy program. Balanced literacy often contains a read aloud. And again, it's appropriate at all levels. Picture books fit great in balanced literacy. Poetry does too. What a lively discussion that you all had during the Poetry Week. I enjoyed your posts. Kudos to all those who gave extra information or background or shared websites with others. I was impressed, and I know that others are using what you're posting. Good for you. So, and that's what teachers do. We're teachers, we teach others. So back to balanced literacy and poetry. Along with read-alouds, poetry fits perfectly and is used extensively often during a balanced literacy program and the shared reading part of that especially in reading workshops, in a reading workshop block, or during a content literacy block. We'll talk a little bit more about content literacy in just a second. Let's talk a little bit about graphic novels. I'm recording this actually before I look at your discussions on graphic novels in magazines and comic books, and I'm expecting some interesting discussions here too. I've been around long enough to see this genre evolve into a hugely popular one. Graphic novels work so well with our struggling readers and writers. I happen to be the guardian of a 15-year-old, that was interesting, about 5 years ago, and she struggled with both reading and writing. And one of her go-to kinds of reading was certainly graphic novels. Let's think more now about teaching with children's literature. The chapters you will read in both strands are so accurate and reflect exactly what's happening in the classrooms right now. Wrap your brain around some common language of educational instruction and know these terms. The terms are reference books, textbooks, and trade books. When we think about school, we think a lot about the textbooks that are used for information or the reference books that are used in informational reading and writing. But you know what? These are not the books that draw children's interest. The books that draw children's interests are actually, and they're called trade books, and actually they draw the interest of instructors too. There's no question that children and students prefer trade books to text and reference books. Trade books have so much to offer. For one thing, they're affordable. Textbooks are highly expensive, incredibly expensive. And textbooks are so expensive that they can only be bought by districts maybe once every 10 or 15 years. And they're often outdated. And trade books are published more often. They often have much more up-to-date information, and they can be found and selected to reach so many different levels for our students. Again, that's what our students like to read, and we want to encourage that because we want to encourage them to become lifelong readers. Again, I've been around long enough to remember when within the classroom, phonics drove the instruction, and that was, during the 1940s, the 1950s, and part of the 1960s. Now, I wasn't there quite that long ago, but I certainly do remember when I came into education in the late 1960s, phonics certainly drove the instruction, but soon to be taken over by a wave around the country and in the state of Maine. The wave was literature-based instruction, also called whole language, if any of you remember that. But at that time, in the late 60s and the early 1970s, the reading wars began. And, there was evidence and there was research to back both camps, the phonics camp and the whole language or the literature-based instruction camp. And I remember it was huge. It was not until, and actually these wars lasted up until about the year 2000, when there was some legislation, and it was driven by No Child Left Behind, and balanced literacy became the focus for the instruction. Now, balanced literacy focuses on 5 components. They're basically phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. At the lower levels, between grades K and 5, you'll see a lot of phonics and phonemic awareness taking place. Hopefully, at upper grade levels, the concentration is on fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And comprehension, of course, the ultimate goal for any kind of instruction. So children and young adult literature fits naturally within this balanced literacy framework. Educators, whether using a basal approach with systematic scripted lessons or a more flexible curriculum, use some form of children's or young adult literature. And it's to our advantage to be well aware of what's out there to use, especially in literature-based units or in the content areas. And when we talk about reading and we talk about content areas, we're talking about reading and writing, actually, in math, science, and social studies. Or, with programs like sustained silent reading that happens in classes all over the place, or with accelerated readers, which are very popular also. Teachers of all levels who use literature as the focal point of instruction need to be aware that readers of all ages draw meaning from and make responses to literature based on their experience. Readers appreciate literature and they enjoy it. It's called aesthetic learning, or they use it to drive their own instruction or somebody to drive their instruction, and that's called efferent learning, because students do not only just learn from their content or their textbooks, they also learn from a wide range of reading. One thing educators have in common are that there are a number of books that they feel that students need to read or they need to be exposed to. And those books are often called classics. Not all educators agree on which classics are most important. Usually a school's curriculum will identify those books that they want used. So, well then, with all these choices and with all these districts and all kinds of curriculums, how do states and districts and local school districts know that students are achieving proper backgrounds in literacy? And when I say literacy, I mean reading and writing. That's where standards come in. Unless you've all been hiding under rocks, I'm sure that you've heard of the Common Core state standards. Maine is in the process of assessing these standards right now in schools, and the spring of 2015, which we're in, is when all districts in Maine are used, not all, but when districts in Maine are using the Common Core state standards. They're very multifaceted and extensive and deep. And in this course, I'm directing you to look carefully at only one part of the state's Common Core state standards and have a conversation about these. And this is the part that's called text complexity. You'll see that one of the assignments on the assignment board of the content folder, you're going to be asked to read this part of the Common Core state standards, and a link is provided. I'm going to ask you to read a PDF about text complexity, and also take a look at how it's written within the state standards. And I really look forward to your discussions about this. So for next time, there are chapters to read. Finish your classic novel and write that annotation on your wiki. View the Common Core state standards, text complexity. Have a great vacation, and nothing's due until February 24th. Until then, read on.